I've been involved in Sudan since 1995. I've personally completed 27 missions, sometimes up to a month or more in duration, taken about 1,000 public meetings inside Sudan, church services, seminars, conferences, school assemblies, and so on. And in the last 26 years, we have taken in 970,000 Bibles and Christian books into Sudan in 26 different languages. And I've helped to establish and supply with textbooks 100 primary schools, a high school, some Bible colleges. We set up clinics and refurbished a major hospital. So taken medical teams and trained the medics of the paramedics of the SPLA and also their chaplaincy corps. So I've been heavily involved in there. And right from the start, I started discussing with the leadership of the SPLA, Colonel John Garang, who was the leader, founder of SPLA, and his number 2, Commander Salva Kiir, that in fact the only hope for South Sudan for long-standing peace and freedom would be independence. They said, but that's not possible because no country in Africa has been recognized internationally who's changed the borders of the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, which seems bizarre because there was no African present at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. And to be fair, the Berlin Conference was called, in one sense, to get rid of slavery in Africa, to end the Islamic slavery, to end the intertribal genocides and slavery. But still, obviously, colonial, political, and other things came to play as well. But they drew boundaries without regard to the ethno-linguistic realities on the ground. Many times it's a latitude or longitude or a river. And of course, countries can live on both sides of a river. Just think of the Danube or the Rhine or the Mississippi or the Orange River. So rivers aren't always boundaries. Sometimes there's the same community on both sides of the river. So just take, for example, the Vambo people. Half of the Vambo people live in Namibia. Half live in Angola. Half of the Vambo people speak Afrikaans, the other half speak Portuguese. Half of the Vambo people drive on the left-hand side of the road, half drive on the right-hand side of the road, and in different time zones, even though they're north and south of one another. Half of the Shangaan live in Mozambique, the other half live in South Africa, and so on. And then you can go up to the Chichewa people. The Chichewa people are spread across Malawi, Mozambique, and Zambia. And how on earth are they not their own country? Well, the colonial boundaries didn't consider ethno-linguistic reality. So Africa's borders don't make much sense in terms of ethno-linguistic. And this is why so many wars have taken place in Africa. Just take the hideous Biafran War, where millions of people died between 1967 and 1970 in Nigeria. Again, it was because the Christian Igbos were being oppressed by the Muslim Hausa in the north, and tremendous bloodshed. Well, Sudan's the same sort of thing. So when the British left Sudan, 1955, end of 1955, the local people and the missionaries pleaded with the British, please don't make South Sudan, the black Christians and animists of South Sudan, part of Islamic Sudan. They're culturally different, they're racially different, they're religiously different, they have different alphabet, they have different calendar. Make them part of Uganda, make them part of Kenya, make them independent country of Equatoria, anything, but don't put them in Islamic Sudan. The Muslim North has used Equatoria as a place for looting and for slave raids for centuries, and just it's not going to be good. And for whatever reason, Britain just decided to leave it in a unitary state, and instantly, in 1st of January 1956, as the British left and the South Sudanese at the strike of midnight became independent, the Arabs started to treat South Sudan as their colony. Out of the first 800 leaders in South Sudan, only 2 weren't Arabs. And so, as the people in South Sudan said, this is the last war of decolonization in Africa. And the Equatorial Corps, the African soldiers of Equatoria, were told to hand their rifles in at the store, get on the train, go north. And this is where the war began, because the Equatorial Corps said, we're not handing in our rifles, we're the protectors of the South. And we know you Arabs, you've treated us as slaves for centuries. We're not going to hand in our rifles. And so this is where the resistance started. And what they called Anyanya 1, the first war of independence. Well, the Arab North has been brutal to the South. They Islamized the South. The people had to, Sunday is a day for school and the marketplace. Friday is the day of rest. You're going to speak Arabic. The children are beaten at school if they speak the home language. They had to speak Arabic. It was all Islamization, Arabization, and so on. And they were brutal. They burned churches. They killed Christians. They crucified Christians. They whipped women for not wearing the hijab. Pastors were arrested and whipped for having communion wine in a church, and Sharia law. It was bad. And so the South, for survival, had to resist. They had to fight back. They had to defend themselves. And so they fought this long war. And when I was trying to persuade the SPLA leaders to go for independence, they said all we can hope for is autonomy, because they'll never accept redrawing the map. The map in Africa, it's been treated by the African Union as sacrosanct. You cannot question the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885. So I said to them, you have to go for independence. You will always be a persecuted African Christian black minority in Sudan unless you can redraw the map where you're the majority and where you can rule yourselves and have self-determination. Well, they didn't think it was possible. As recently as 2001, I was arguing with Commander Salva Kiir, who said it wasn't possible. Well, since 2011, by God's grace, Commander Salva Kiir is the president of South Sudan, an independent, internationally recognized South Sudan. So I was campaigning for this. I must have done well over 1,000 meetings internationally on behalf of campaigning for South Sudan's independence, recruited Franklin Graham into the campaign to promote independence for South Sudan, managed, and he took it to President George Bush Jr. at the time to campaign for it. Sanctions were put on northern Sudan, and pressure was brought to bear until they stopped the persecution, stopped the bombing, allowed a referendum. And from 2005, there was a comprehensive peace agreement, referendum for independence, and they received independence in South Sudan, 9th of July 2011. And praise God, this year we celebrate 10 years of an independent South Sudan. Now, that's not the end of the story. You still have the Nuba Mountains with an island of Christianity and the Sea of Islam up north, still in northern Sudan. You have Blue Nile Christians as well, who are not yet independent and free, but at least a good bulk, the South Sudanese, are free. We're continuing to try and help people in northern Sudan and in these Christian enclaves like Blue Nile and the Nuba Mountains, and they still need a lot of help and prayer. But astounding things have happened, and so it just shows you that those people say, oh, it's absolutely impossible. Well, it is possible if the demand and the will of the people on the ground is for freedom and self-determination. We know it's possible. In my work behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe, I've seen Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia break free from the Soviet Union, free and independent countries. Ukraine and Belarus, free and independent. Slovakia, free now from Czech. And that was the Velvet Divorce. No bloodshed, peacefully done. Croatia and Slovakia, Slovenia of Yugoslavia, broke away free and independent. So I've seen a lot of successful secession movements, and I'm convinced that it can work in the Cape, it should work in the Cape. And the independence of South Sudan, I think, is a great encouragement to all of us that at last the redrawing of the map from the Berlin Conference 1884, 1885, it's been accepted as possible. So now I think with that precedent, we can push ahead and hopefully see more ruinous situations and wars prevented by recognizing ethno-linguistic demographic realities on the ground. Just to also remind you that biblically, a nation is an ethno-linguistic people group of a shared faith. That's Missiology 101. It's also biblical. For example, the children of Israel remained Israelites, Hebrews, even after 480 years in Egypt. They didn't become Egyptians. Your nation is not determined by geographic accident. Your nation is determined by your parental ancestry. And so that's why the Bible has a lot of details about genealogies, who begat who, and so on. And remember, one of the biggest events in the Old Testament was the secession of Israel from Egypt. Let my people go. And actually, that was the theme of the South Sudan independence movement. Let my people go. They marched under those banners. And I think that that's a good biblical precedent. There's also the other one in Kings, where after the third king of the United Kingdom of Israel, Solomon's son, Rehoboam, when he was unwise and he tried to increase taxes on the people, the 10 northern kingdom tribes broke away to form Israel, and the southern tribe of Judah was separated. And as Judah mobilized for war, a prophet came and said, go back to your tents. This is of the Lord, which just shows that secession can be biblical. Well, we've got examples in the Bible like Exodus and the separation of Judah from northern kingdom of Israel, to see that secessions can be of the Lord. Historically, of course, you've got some of the most successful nations of the world were as a result of secession. Switzerland seceded from Austria. The United States of America seceded from Britain. We know that Texas seceded from Mexico. Norway in 1905 seceded from Sweden. Finland seceded from the Soviet Union and from Russia in 1917. And so we could go on. There's Namibia seceded from South Africa in 1990. And to be honest, they're doing better than we are right now. So secession, if you start to look at it, you can see many examples of where it's worked. And those people who say it couldn't work here, well, they're being very ignorant of history and unimaginative, because this is how history goes. And I believe we've got the force of history is on the side of decentralization and of secession movements.
Just quickly, in South Sudan, did they declare unilateral independence, or was it a referendum?
It was a referendum. So what happened was the South Sudanese fought for independence. They managed to get a peace agreement agreed on a ceasefire by 2005. And 2005 comprehensive peace agreement made provision for a referendum within 5 years. When they held that referendum at the beginning of 2011, it was a 90-something% freedom, secession, separation vote. And then within 6 months, they had the independence celebration. That was internationally recognized, it was legal. And even the president of Sudan came for the celebrations. It was fully recognized. So at the end, it was all done in a legal way. It was instantly recognized all over the world. So I do believe that the best way to go about secession is not unilateral, but to go through the painstaking process of referendums, mandate on the ground, negotiations. We want to avoid war. We want to do things peacefully. And we've got many good examples of that happening, such as Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Norway, Finland, Slovakia, and I do believe Namibia is another good example. So, yes, to take the patience and take the longer route, to do it in a legal, stable, peaceful way is always to be preferred.
And the problem also probably with a unilateral independence is that not just a legitimacy issue in the rest of the world, but also a legitimacy issue in the country that just seceded. So the people might not believe in this new country.
Yes, one wants to do this in a very stable way. And so progressively, discussion, iron sharpens iron, open discussion, what's the best form, how do we want to be run? And of course, you want to set in safeguards to protect yourselves from the kind of abuses that we are trying to secede from. We don't want more of the same, where, say, for example, we seceded from South Africa, but we continued with the same kind of policies, economic and political, which created this debacle without the checks and balances to prevent the corruption that's led to the failures of Eskom and Telkom and SA and everything else. We've got to have laws set in place, and that needs negotiation, discussion, and stable. Also, we want to follow in examples of excellence, like Switzerland and Singapore. We don't want to follow in footsteps of failure, like socialist countries and centralized totalitarian countries around the world. So, yes, I do believe it's so important that we discuss these things, which is why I launched the Cape Independence Forum, to get the different parties and groups, movements together, that we can be discussing not only how to achieve independence, but what follows after it. So important that we lay good, solid foundations for the future.